now that we've got an understanding of the millennial and what they want and what they aspire to and how to engage them, let's kind of turn to a somewhat less glamorous but equally important issue. How do you fire millennials? I mean, is it the same way we did it before, or does this require a different cadence, or what do you think?
Again, hopefully the organization is one that is feedback rich. So at the point of firing, it should not be a surprise. And I always go back to something that Professor Irv Grossbeck here in his class would say, which is if you're going to fire someone, do it in the first 30 seconds. And the second element I'd add to that is less is more in terms of the explanation in that moment. Again, it should not be a surprise if you've had feedback along the way. The less is more is, I think, as a manager, you need to wear your HR hat in that moment. If after that emotional moment has passed and they want to come back and understand a little bit more, then you can have that dialogue. But in that moment, quickly and less is more.
I don't think, I concur with Michelle. I don't think it's really changed. And in fact, that notion of every review should never be a surprise, that was stuff that was talked about 40 years ago. Like, that's not new. And so well-run and highly functioning organizations have been providing constant feedback for decades. And so if you have to exit somebody out or coach them out for whatever reason, the skill set was a mismatch, the attitude was a mismatch, to Michelle's point, it should never be a surprise, but when it's done, you do it and you move on. You can be kind, you can be generous, you can be polite, but you know, you can't leave somebody there if it's not working out and it's a cancer.
And the one thing I would want to add to that is specifically related to this generation is often for some of these, this has been their first job perhaps, and their social network is very intertwined with this work network. So it's not the one and done anymore, right? You may be out of the firm, but you are still connected to everyone in there, and you as a manager needs to know that whatever's being said, it's going to get right back there.
That's
right? Those networks really hold tight.
There's like an echo factor. But this is interesting. I love your emphasis saying, hey, feedback shouldn't be a surprise. Bad news ought not to be a surprise. But let me mischievously turn it around. Why is it a surprise then to leaders of organizations when the millennials as employee activists organize a petition signing saying, hey, the CEO ought to be fired? You know, why is that a surprise then?
Well, I think some of the unintended consequences of creating a culture, the positive side is you allow people to bring their whole selves to work. Google, you know, kind of pioneered that. But if we get to a point where the team, the enemy is seen inside of the building versus outside of the building, that can actually engender bad behaviors. And I would argue that gets to that point because management lost sight of what was happening with the employee base, what their issues were they hearing them along the way. And you know, maybe at some point you do have to draw a line and draw barriers, and you want to do that before it gets too far. But you really have to stay on top of it, and this comes back to the empathy that Michelle talked about earlier. You've got to know where people are at, what are their issues. And by the way, then you can always say to an employee, we as a company have made this decision. You may have made the choice now that you don't want to work here. We would miss you.
Let me get back to this activism amongst the millennials, Michelle. Is that an opportunity or a threat for corporate America?
It needs to be seen as an opportunity. So it may feel like a threat at times, but you have to figure out how to work with it. So in our organization, we've had a couple at a much smaller scale than maybe what Amazon's going through right now, for instance, or Google, but of wanting to imprint one's agenda onto the brand of the company. And it is about listening, it is about understanding and unpacking truly what the motivation is, what the needs are, and then figuring out where you can bend and flex while maintaining the integrity, of course, of the organization, of the company, the visions and the goals.
And this is actually an issue that's much bigger than the generational issue. If you look at the role that CEOs are having to play, you know, will they take stands on public issues or not? Are they expected to? Or in the old days you wouldn't, it's just that we just do our job and work. That's not the case. And there are, you look at the work of the Business Roundtable, this notion of stakeholders versus shareholders. These conversations run top to bottom. I don't believe that that's a generational issue. I believe it's a business issue.